Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. Michael Bryant here. We are juggling a number of things this afternoon, and we're going to get into now some of the pivotal testimony in New Jersey versus Jeremiah Monell. This is the guy who is accused of stabbing his estranged wife, and oh, by the way, his 12-year-old son got to take it in firsthand from the stairway. First up, a little bit of testimony from Glenn Adgeson. Now, he is a neighbor who was really one of the first on the scene, but he also happens to have some paramedic training, which made his observations and what he saw and encountered that day very important. Again, this is Glenn Adgeson.
Your attention back to December 18th, 19th of 2016. Where was your son that night from the 18th into the 19th?
He was at Jimmy and Crystal Bruder's house.
You know why he was there?
Yes, because that particular corner is the bus stop for the local school district. And all the kids tend to migrate to that particular bus stop. And on inclement weather, Jimmy and Crystal open their homes to keep kids warm, keep them dry. So my son slept there. Again, they were friends of my family. So he slept there just because it was the previous school night.
And where were you at that night from the 18th to the 19th?
I was at my home, which was probably about 100 yards north of where they were.
Going to the morning of the 19th, do you recall about what time you woke up that morning?
I was awoken approximately, I'll say, between 7:45 and 8 o'clock.
What caused you to wake up that morning?
I had a frantic phone call from my son, Turtle.
And without telling us what he had to say, what was your reaction to what he told you?
I immediately hung the phone up and ran down to Tara's home at 7901 Raymond Drive.
Had you already had plans for that day to see Tara?
I had actually had plans for the evening before, the evening in question. I then went to the upper right-hand corner, raised it just enough to where I could look in. What I saw was Miss Dyer's head was turned to the right. I saw minimal blood spatter up the side of her cheek. Eyes wide open, mouth wide open. Skin was pale, cold to the touch. I went to move the jaw and it wouldn't move. I went to reach for a pulse in the carotid area, and my finger went into a gaping hole. I immediately pulled the blanket back, told Jimmy to exit the residence, and Jimmy had been looking over my shoulder. He was on the phone with the 911 dispatcher. He dropped me the phone, and he went and exited the residence as he came in. I told the dispatcher what we had. I asked for a BLS and ALS ambulance to respond to the scene to do a pronouncement. Also asked for the crime scene unit and told them I was securing the residence and declaring it a crime scene until they could get there.
This is not your normal recipient witness who just happened on a crime scene. You know, he sounds like one of the first responders because he does, in fact, have some paramedic training. That was one of the neighbors who did just come upon the scene when the crime scene was truly fresh. Joining me right now is Andrew, attorney. Good to have you, sir. Thank you for joining.
Good afternoon. How are you?
Good. Hey, I have a question for you about this kind of testimony, whether it's on the defense side, prosecution side. How important is it, how helpful is it to have really what is just a recipient witness with this kind of background?
Well, the credibility of any witness is the key to their testimony. And so when he takes the stand with all of this background and is able to give that testimony in a very calm and straightforward manner, it's devastating to whoever is receiving it on the opposite side. It's very good testimony. You can even see the crest on the sweatshirt that he's wearing from the department, giving him even more credibility.
Yeah, probably not an accident. I'm guessing the prosecutor said, hey, do you have that sweater with the logo on it because it makes you look like you're an expert, and we know you're not, but wear it, would you please? Not a surprise. Right. How do you feel about, I mean, the most important testimony so far has come from this 12-year-old kid who was the son of the victim and the murderer. How do you handle, a 12-year-old witness on the stand and take it from either side? I mean, it's a tricky situation.
Well, as a defense, and this case is a very difficult case for the defense, you've got to take into account the emotions that a child might be going through, the ability for a child to misperceive or to imagine certain circumstances that they fill in. And that's the best that you can do is try to poke holes in the credibility, and even if it's accidentally not credible, that's the best you can do.
You know, this is a case in which the defendant was offered a 30 years or so sentence. It was actually set up as 30 years to life. It was going to be dependent on what the judge decided. But that's much better than what he's up for now. If convicted, it's 30 years without the possibility of parole. So if you're representing this guy, you're his defense attorney, you know, what's your leverage? What are you telling him to make him to, you know, kind of give that plea some thought, dude?
Well, one of the things that I think lay people might not know about what happens in a defense counsel's office is that the decisions ultimately rest with the client. And it's their life, it's their future that is on the line. And so when a client says they're not going to plead, no matter how bad the evidence is against them. I mean, I can tell you stories that go on for a long time, but the one recently, I had a client who I did convince to take a deal, and from jail he blamed me for that. He was upset about it. And that's something that makes it difficult for me to sleep at night.
And to your point, this particular defendant tried to get rid of his attorney. So there was already some friction there, and I'm guessing that he wouldn't have been too receptive to some suggestion that, hey, why don't you take this 30-year deal? So he didn't, and we're in court because of that. So let's go back now for more testimony. This is from another witness who came on the scene soon after the body was discovered. This is James Greer.
At some point, do you recall Tara and the defendant leaving your house?
I do not recall them leaving. They were still at my house when I left to go take care of some business. Okay. I saw nothing out of the ordinary at first.
Okay. Where did you see something out of the ordinary?
When we got to the living room.
Okay. What did you see in the living room?
There was a blanket on the floor.
Okay. And did you do anything after seeing the blanket?
I didn't react at first until my friend had raised the blanket up, and all I saw was her face.
When you say your friend, who is your friend?
Glenn Atchison.
What can you describe what you saw once the blanket was lifted up?
I only saw her face covered in blood.
Okay, whose face did you see?
Tara O'Shea's.
That is James Greer, one of the folks who came upon the crime scene in this Jeremiah Monell murder case, a gruesome stabbing death in this southern New Jersey home site. Just brutal. Andrew Cherkasky is still with me, and he is a defense attorney, so I'm going to pick your defense attorney brain here because I keep focusing on what's a win, for the defense in this case. We have a 30-year plea deal. Don't want that. Let's go to trial. We have what seems to be an overwhelming amount of evidence against your client. What is a win for you?
Well, the defense started in their opening statements with a claim that somebody else did this. Now, they haven't offered who that person is, so they're trying something. My instinct is that this is a client who says he doesn't want a deal, who never wants to admit to what he did. And so I think the win is giving the client what he asks for. And that sometimes is all we can do as defense counsel. I mean,
you do have that obligation to zealously represent your client, but sometimes if your client gets in the way, there's only so much you can do to be zealous. I mean, he has to offer him the proper defense, but in this case, I think you would agree that I'm not sure there's a lot he can do with that defense.
No, this case doesn't look good for the defense, and maybe that's justice doing its thing. But the defense counsel is still there, sitting at the table, is going to ask tough questions and present a defense, especially with the idea that this is a client, this is a defendant who wants a defense put up. That's what the American system demands.
We touched on the 12-year-old son of the victim and the defendant. In fact, we're going to hear that testimony coming up, but I'm going to get more thoughts from you on the whole idea that this kid is going to testify before the jury. He's done that. We've seen him. It is heart-wrenching. It is brutal. You don't often hear, do you know who killed your mother? And the kid points to his dad. He says, yeah, my dad. I mean, he even identified him by his middle name. This kid's going to have some issues. Have you dealt with young witnesses that have been put in a similar position to this?
Sure, I deal with witnesses of that age all the time. The vulnerability for the prosecution in a witness of that age is that they are sufficiently susceptible to suggestion by law enforcement or by family members, or even the idea that they could start to manipulate what has occurred in their testimony. This is an age where that starts to occur. Typically, you don't see that under the age of about 10 or 12, but this child was sophisticated enough to have that potential. Doesn't seem that way from the testimony I've seen, but it's a potential angle.
So we're going to hear that testimony coming up in just a moment. Thank you, Andrew. Stay right where you are. We'll have more on the Law and Crime Network when we come right back. Hey, folks, welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. We're going to get back into some riveting testimony from the son of the defendant in New Jersey versus Jeremiah Monell in just a moment. But before we do that, joining us with an update and a bit of a highlight and a tease on what's coming up on tonight's debrief, Aaron Keller.
Michael, good to see you. Okay, let's talk about the McStay case. Testimony ended early in that case out of California, where Chase Merritt is accused of killing a family of 4 and then dumping their bodies in a grave in the Mojave Desert. It took police a long time from a couple of different jurisdictions to try to unravel exactly what was going on in this case. We're going to look back at that key testimony that came late last night, where blood, or suspected blood, turned up on a table, but the police didn't know exactly what it was when they were looking at it, and they only noticed it when they started to enlarge photographs. Is it actually blood, and what was going on with the police work? We're going to break that down. Plus, the Jeremiah Monell case out of New Jersey that you're talking about as we speak, Michael. We're going to break down some earlier testimony about some DNA that was recovered from the crime scene that doesn't look good for the state. Up until now, we've been saying this is a pretty strong case from the state, but this time around, the defense did score a couple of key points. We'll break those down on the debrief. Plus, an update in what happened late yesterday in the arraignment for the suspect who authorities in western Wisconsin have accused of kidnapping Jamie Claus after killing her parents. We're going to just update that case in case you missed that late hearing. That and more coming up on the debrief at 5 o'clock Eastern today. Michael, I hope you'll be watching.
You bet. You know I will. Thank you, Aaron. Always look forward to the debrief. What we got for you now is some of the most powerful testimony in New Jersey versus Jeremiah Monell. As you know, this was a case in which the defendant allegedly stabbed his estranged wife as much as 48 times, 2 different knives, and had one of the kids in the house. There were 5 children between the couple, and one of them happened to be watching this unfold. That's Junior, Jeremiah Monell Jr. Let's listen to his testimony now.
Your father on top of your mother, could you describe what you saw?
He was on the floor choking her.
Can you demonstrate how he had his hands? And the record could reflect that he had, when demonstrated, one hand over the other.
Yeah.
With the thumbs around?
Yeah.
And hands around?
Yeah.
And those hands were around what part of your mom's body?
Her throat.
And could you hear anything while your dad was doing that?
No.
You mentioned that there was a table in the kitchen.
Yes.
Were you able to see everything clearly even though that table was there?
Yes.
Was your dad saying anything while that was happening?
No.
How long do you think that was going on for?
Wait. Can you rephrase the question?
How long do you think your dad was choking your mom?
A minute. Maybe less.
What happened after that period of time?
He got up and he got a knife off the fridge, a kitchen knife.
After he got up, did you hear your mom say anything?
Yes. She said, "Let me die in peace."
And where did your dad go after your mom said that?
to the kitchen to grab a knife off the fridge.
Whew, okay. And I forgot to mention going in, don't try to adjust your set. That is a fogging system used to disguise this underage witness. We can't reveal his identity in terms of look, but we know it is Jeremiah Jr., the son of the defendant in this case, with some powerful testimony. You should know that that case, New Jersey versus Jeremiah Monell, is done for today. The state has rested. We're not sure yet whether the defense is putting on a case of any kind. We don't know. With me is defense attorney Andrew Cherkasky, and you just put on this, or heard this case put on by the prosecution. Knowing what you know about the case, what if any defense case is there?
Well, the defense counsel said in the opening statement that it was a whodunit, that although there was quite a bit of evidence that may suggest that it was Monell, that it was, in fact, someone else. Now, the defense hasn't suggested who that person is, and the testimony from the son is just devastating for the defense. But they have to go with some sort of argument that the son was confused or has been manipulated on behalf of his mother to make sure that it was the father who went down. I don't see that to be a particularly effective strategy, but it's what's there.
Yeah, and there was some reference in openings by defense that, hey, this is a kid. They forget things, they misremember things, they make things up. I don't know if that's going to sell to the jury, but nonetheless, let's go back into the courtroom and hear more testimony from Jeremiah Jr.
Actually see your dad grab the knife?
No, but I did hear the metal of the knife rub on the wood, or the plastic, I mean.
Can you demonstrate what that sounded like?
Like, psh, or like a... Have you ever had one of those plastic car things?
Like a wind-up car?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
And the tires rub on the fender a little bit. Yeah, something like that.
Like that?
Yeah, except with metal wheels.
Where did your dad go after getting that knife?
He went back to my mother and stabbed her.
Which way did you walk to get back to the living room? Did you walk through the kitchen?
Yes.
Did you see anything in your dad's hands while he walked back to the
Yes.
room? What did you see?
A knife.
About how big was that knife?
About this big.
And after he had that knife, can you describe what he did?
He stabbed my mother.
Can you describe what position your mother was in when your father stabbed her?
Rephrase the question.
How was your mother laying when your dad stabbed her?
Full on the ground, just shocked and just not moving, really.
What do you remember seeing?
My father stabbing her, and that's all I saw. I looked away.
Did you hear anything?
Just the gushing of him stabbing her.
Jeremiah Jr. talking really pretty plainly and calmly and collected about what he saw his father do to his mother in gruesome detail. But I have to say, it seems like, he has processed it to the point, it was 2 years ago, but he's still a young guy, and he had a traumatic event, but the way he's laying this out, it's pretty impressive. Andrew Cherkasky on the line there with me. What do you think? I mean, is this a dream client witness for the prosecution?
Oh, it doesn't get better than this. I mean, not only is it good testimony for the prosecution, he's delivering it in just the most credible way. I mean, credibility is something I always talk about no matter what case it is, because the testimony on its face may be good for one side or the other, but if the credibility of the witness, because of the way that they appear in court or the way that they speak, the way that they appear to be biased, that can totally change their testimony. This is amongst the most credible witnesses I've seen in a case of this sort, especially as closely related. He's calm. He's delivering information that matters. It's devastating for the defense.
Yeah, and if you were thinking when the defense made the opening statement that, boy, I can't wait to see this kid because he's going to be shaky, he's going to be, hard to nail down on the facts, that's wrong. That's not what they got. This kid is very calm, cool, and collected. Stay where you are there, Andrew. We're going to come back to you in a moment. We're going to move across the country, though, when we come back. We're going to take a break from Jeremiah Monell. Again, that trial has rested for the day. So we'll come back and we'll go to California for the Merritt case, bring you up to date on what's happening there with Law and Crime continues. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. We have moved from New Jersey on the East Coast now to California on the West Coast, where we've been following the unbelievable story involving the death of 4 family members, a gruesome bludgeoning death. We've not heard a lot of the testimony about that, but it is pretty common knowledge. Those are the prosecution's allegations. And in this case, we have a family of 4 that all disappeared, and then their bodies were found in the Mojave Desert. They lived in a town probably about 90 miles north of San Diego, which is roughly 95 miles north of that southern border there. And all of those locations come into play during the course of this trial. We're going to hear some of the testimony now from prior witnesses because they are done for today. Yeah, it's a West Coast trial, and you're thinking, hey, great, I'm going to get some popcorn, I'm going to be hanging out till 7 or 8 tonight. No. They're done because there was a juror that had some pre-existing appointment of some sort that the court knew about well before they impaneled the jury, and they arranged to take kind of a short day today. So we're going to use the opportunity to catch up on some of the testimony that you may have missed. This is one of the witnesses who knew the family long before they disappeared. And as you may recall, they bought a home in Freehold, this area, in this area in San Diego, and they were kind of fixing it up, doing a little DIY work there, painting, etc. And this is testimony from a friend who had been there during that process and actually saw the defendant there at the time and had a certain reaction to it. This is MacGyver McGarger. That's the name. That's the witness. Let's hear what he has to say.
Bought the house on the 31st with you while you painted these 2 walls.
Summer, Joey, the 2 boys, and Chase.
Do you see Chase in the courtroom today?
Yes, I do.
Please identify him for the record by telling us where he's seated and an article of clothing he's wearing.
To my left, purple tie, blue shirt.
May the record reflect the witnesses identified the defendant. Was the defendant there the whole time?
No, he wasn't.
When do you remember him showing up?
He was there when I first got there.
And what was he doing there? Do you know?
He was kind of standing there as I walked in. I could feel the tension in the room between Summer and he, and right off the bat I knew this is who Summer was talking about. She didn't introduce me. He didn't introduce himself. And she just kind of avoided him, and so I'm like, this must be the guy. Joey was in the office, maybe on the phone, on the computer, so I think he was waiting for Joseph, and then the kids were running around, obviously, coming to greet me, and hear me, and, wanted to help me out, the kids.
Okay. And did you pay attention to how long the defendant was there or when you left?
Well, he might have been there an hour, could have been 2, only because I just remember the awkwardness.
Otherwise, nothing else that was memorable about him coming or going or what he was doing?
No.
So that is testimony of a family friend of the McStay family. He had interaction with them long before they disappeared, and in his particular testimony, talking about some of the DIY home improvements they were doing. Andrew, let me ask you this. How important is it to kind of lay some foundation of this prior relationship in the context of the crimes and his interaction, this witness's interaction with the defendant?
Well, when you're prosecuting a case of this complexity with circumstantial evidence, you have kind of two decisions to make. Do you want to just jump to your best evidence and be light on the additional surrounding details, or do you want to go all in and go from the top to the bottom with every ounce of exchange that victims had? And I think that's what the prosecution's decided to do here with a case of this sort of magnitude. That's an important decision to make, and I think that even if they were to lose, then they could say they did everything they could.
And remember, this is a very long trial. The estimates are 4 months plus. And for those who might be watching and thinking, well, come on, it's basically a murder case. Well, it's not. There's a lot of whodunit here. This is a very big whodunit, but they also done it to 4 victims. And that means, you know, they've got to lay out the crime for all 4 victims. And that means some redundancy in the evidence, but you still got to make the case for all of them, right?
Absolutely. The estimate of 4 months and that sort of plan isn't necessarily how I would have prosecuted the case back when I was doing violent crimes in a special victims unit, but it's not a wrong way to go about doing it. The medical testimony takes a very long time, and like I said, they've got to do everything they can to say that they did everything that they could, hoping for a guilty verdict for the prosecution, if that's the side that you feel for, or to the other side, the same, that a full case was put on.
And that's a very different situation in a long trial versus a 2 or 3 day trial where you can really condense things and the order is far less important. Here, you're telling a long story. Let's continue some of that story. Let's go back into the courtroom with continued testimony from the witness. This is the same witness, but after the disappearance of the family.
I walked in, and now, you know, especially because the dog was left there, it was so odd that it just reassured me that this dog goes everywhere with them, and I couldn't believe they would leave him behind. And that was just, 2 days before I last saw them. So when I got there, I just was taking maybe a visual picture of what was there and what might be different from when I was there last.
Okay. What was Susan doing when you got there?
When I walked in, Susan, she let me in, and she was cleaning the kitchen.
How would you describe her mental state at that point?
I think she might have been emotional. I mean, she was, cleaning, working at cleaning the kitchen pretty good. And my first comment to her was, I have, the investigators completed their job here, and so, because apparently there's some eggs or something, some kitchen, some food, pre-prep stuff that was left on the counter, I think she told me, and so she was pretty much cleaning it all up.
Did you notice what had changed since the last time you had been in the house on the 3rd to what you were seeing now?
Well, when I had taken some just visual snapshots, the couple things that stood out when I walked into that family room kitchen area was the futon. It looked like the cover was off, and I thought that was odd. And then I was maybe a little concerned that she was cleaning the kitchen too soon, because maybe there's some evidence or something. And so with her cleaning it, I couldn't obviously make a comparison with the last day I was there.
Were the cupboards and doors and cupboard doors and drawers still out on the island in the floor where you had put in the paint?
Yeah, I believe that everything was still off because I never got back to repainting that. But I did notice tucked underneath, and I don't know if it's some of that tucked in underneath on the island, one of the shelves was the paint pan with the foil lining in it with a paint roller with dry paint, which was odd to me because the reason I told her to put the foil was to clean it up. And why would she just leave it there and for it to be dried up?
Mom, what are you doing? I mean, this is still likely an active crime scene. I guess we can understand the urgency that the mom might feel that, hey, the house is a mess, I have nervous energy, I don't know where my family is, let me clean up. But boy, Andrew, what do you think about the potential problems for the prosecution if you have a contaminated crime scene like this?
Well, we've seen it not only in this testimony, but in the testimony of what happened in the days between the leading up to the law enforcement actually coming into the house, and people are coming in and out, and even the sheriff is standing by as he's allowing people to go into the house. That's a real problem in this case.
Andrew, we're going to move on. We're going to take a look at some new testimony here. We had a little problem with your audio. I want to make sure we fix that before we continue on. On the stand now is Troy Degaulle. He is the detective who kind of took the lead in this case, and he's going to talk about the things they found and didn't find when they first looked in the house.
Have you, in your career as a police detective, seen blood spatter?
I have.
Okay. So what you see in the bottom part of this photograph, you can't say it's blood, right?
I can't say it's blood. It's a horrible moment where I don't know what it is. I did not see it with my naked eyes when I was in the residence at all. And now that the district attorney zoomed it in, it puts a pit in my stomach, but I don't know what it is. I can't say it's blood, and I can't say it isn't blood.
Does blood dry in a specific pattern?
It does.
How does it dry?
No foundation.
Sustained foundation.
You receive training as to how blood spatter or blood will dry.
I went to a 40-hour course by the San Bernardino Sheriff's Department for blood pattern analysis.
Does blood dry in a specific manner?
Yes.
How?
It traditionally, obviously, dries it to where it's the thinnest on an object. If it's blood that's spattered onto an object, the outside or the thinnest edges are going to dry first, and then the thicker or the raised area is going to dry later. And in this, what you see is skeletonized. We call it skeletonized drop of something.
Well, more than one drop.
A lot of drops. Because of that bright light source, it's much easier to see dirt and whatever that is, where the naked eye could be sitting right there. We actually worked on this table, and I'm not talking just Detective Troy Degaulle. I'm talking, I was one of the ones who worked at that table, but our whole team, and I had like 10 people searching with us, and we looked at baseboards, ceilings, walls, floors, behind toilets, lift the toilet lid. That's the way we searched. Several of us sat at this table, and that was not seen because I'm going to go with light source, the naked eye. It's very close to the same color as the table, very small, and not out.
So we see Detective Degaulle here, I don't know, he's dancing around a little bit because he's trying to justify the fact they did not see what may or may not be blood. I can't tell you right now whether it's blood or not. Kind of looks like it, but I can't be sure. Andrew, from a defense perspective, what do you do with this kind of testimony that's far from unequivocal from the prosecution?
Well, this is a defense counsel's type of witness where you can really poke holes in it. I mean, in a case of this significance, when someone's constitutional rights are on the line, and you're essentially trying to just suggest that it might be blood because of a camera flash, I mean, this is weak evidence.
And so, on cross, do you attack him and say, look, shouldn't you have seen it when you first went to the house? How are you even qualifying what you think it is now? What's your tact?
Well, a witness who's relatively calm, as this witness is, you can certainly make some strong points without necessarily being too aggressive. You do want to talk about the capabilities that law enforcement has. You've got your crime scene investigators. They have certain collection kits. There's certain tools that can be used. So you almost execute a cross-examination in a pleasant tone, but by talking about what they could have done, but they didn't do.
We're going to talk much more about this when we come back. Andrew, thank you very much. Stay right where you are. We're going to take a break now. We've got an update for you on the Jamie Kloss case. We've also got an update for you on the Jeremiah Monell case. That case, the state has rested. We're waiting to find out if the defense, in fact, is going to put on a case. And then we're also going to jump back into this case out of California, the case with the horrible bludgeoning death of the 4 family members found ultimately in the desert by some motorcycle riders who just happened to come across a skull. So stay right here with us. Don't forget, too, coming up at 5 o'clock, we have Aaron Keller, and he'll have the daily debrief. So if you missed anything, this is the place, and Aaron's the guy. We'll find it for you. We're coming back to the Law and Crime Network. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. I'm Michael Bryant with you for the next hour, and Aaron Keller coming up at 5 with the Daily Debrief. Happy New Year. I mean, is it too late to say Happy New Year, 15th? Okay. And Martin Luther King's actual birthday today. Of course, we found a way to turn it into a 3-day weekend, so it's officially celebrated next Monday. Lots of stuff going on here. Let me bring you up to date, first of all, on New Jersey versus Monell, the case involving the stabbing of the estranged wife in southern New Jersey. The state has rested. And so we'll find out tomorrow whether the defense is going to put on a case at all, or if it's going to be work on jury instruction time and closings and all of those things to wrap the case up. Of course, we're in California as well for the Merritt case, the bludgeoning death of the husband, wife, 2 children. We'll bring you up to date on what's going on there. It is not live now. One of the jurors had a little emergency that was somewhat planned, so I guess that's not an emergency, but had a planned doctor's appointment, some sort of necessary appointment that the court knew about and allowed, and so they had a short day today. But we'll catch you up on what was happening in that courtroom earlier today. Let me tell you what's happening beginning tomorrow. If that's not enough for you, here's some more stuff happening tomorrow. In Ohio versus Claudia Herrig. This is a case in which a woman is accused of killing her husband and then getting the heck out of Dodge. She disappears to Brazil. That's just a tease, just a nugget as to what you might expect in the Ohio versus Claudia Herrig case beginning tomorrow. Everybody has been so glued to the details of the Jamie Kloss abduction and double murder of her parents that we want to keep you up to date on that as best we can. As new things come in, we're going to make you aware about that, about those details. Today, again, this is the case of the 13-year-old abducted by Jake Patterson, the defendant in the case, who has, through a number of statements, effectively admitted to taking this girl, targeting her, taking her, killing her parents to get to her. In fact, it may be on our website. If not, it will be. This is the 13-page complaint against Mr. Patterson that is replete with nauseating details, but it gives you a sense of what was going on with this guy at the time and what uphill battle he's going to have to face as a defendant. But lucky for us, we have with us Andrew Cherkasky, and he's, I've just hired him to represent Mr. Patterson. Counselor, what are you going to do with this apparent load of confessional material from your client?
Well, in a case like this, where you've got a confession, the big question is the psychology. That's the first thing that I'm going to go to as a defense counsel to understand why something so unusual would happen here. His age is inconsistent with this pedophilic type behavior. His lack of prior history is inconsistent with such a bold, violent crime. There's something here psychologically that we're going to have to really investigate if I were his criminal defense attorney.
I saw an eye roll there. If you were, yes, it would be a tough assignment, I think, from what we know right now.
That's right.
And again, the complaint, for those who would like to find it and take a look at it, some reading, lawandcrime.com, it is on the site. Let's take a listen now to the newly released 911 call. This is the neighbors who really found her, Ms. Kloss, on their doorstep and called the authorities.
Douglas County 911.
Hi. I have a young lady at my house right now, and she says her name is Jamie Kloss.
Okay, what's your address?
It's in Gordon, Wisconsin.
Okay, have you seen her photo, ma'am?
Yes, it is her. I 100% think it is her.
Are you, okay.
100%.
Does it look like she's going to run?
No, she's sitting down, she's relaxing.
Okay, hang on just a second. What's your name?
Yep.
What's your name, ma'am?
Kristen Kaczynskis.
Okay, did she show up walking?
Yeah, a neighbor just walked up with her to our house and asked us to call 911.
Okay, hang on just a second.
Are you cold? Do you need a blanket or anything? Okay. Do you need anything to drink or water or anything?
Can you ask the neighbor, did the female just walk up to her house, or how did she come across her?
Hold on 1 second. She wants to know where she came from, how you got her, etc. Okay. Hold on 1 second. I'm going to pass you over to her. Okay. Hi. My name is Jeannie Nutter. We have a cabin up here in Gordon on Oak.
Okay, ma'am.
And I was
Ma'am?
walking, yes?
Okay, can I just get your name?
Jeannie Nutter, N-U-T-T-E-R.
So how did she come up upon your cabin?
I was walking my dog, and we were almost home, and she was walking towards me crying, saying, you got to help me, you got to help me.
Okay.
So I didn't want to go into my cabin because it's too close to Patterson's house.
And she said her name is Jamie Kloss?
Yep. And when I walked into this house, they recognized her immediately from Porter.
Okay.
So Jamie, do you know when he's going to come back? She thought he was going to come back home at midnight.
Who's going to come back?
Boy, can you imagine? I mean, most of us across the country had heard about the case and her disappearance. Jamie Kloss gone for about 3 months, her parents both killed. But imagine the local attention to this case. And then imagine you open your door and there she is. And that's what the folks on the phone were basically relaying to the 911 operator. Andrew, let me get your thoughts on this case. Maybe from the moment you heard about it until her discovery 3 months later, and I'm guessing a lot of folks surprised to find that she was still alive. What were your thoughts?
Well, the initial thoughts when you hear about a case like this where just the daughter goes missing and the parents are dead is that that she would end up dead as well. I mean, that's statistically how these cases tend to go, and so that's a devastating reality that law enforcement likely thought would happen. You also think, well, if she doesn't show up dead, then was she somehow a part of this? And you have these terrible thoughts about was she in cahoots with whoever did this? And to find out that this is the worst case scenario, but luckily and miraculously she's alive, is really special.
Yeah, I mean, the good news is she's alive. The horrible news is what she's coming home to is just devastating. Let's listen now to the interview with the folks who contacted the police. Our own Heather Hansen got a hold of them, got an interview, and here's how that sounds.
When I saw her, I knew she was in trouble because I knew wherever she came from, she left in a hurry. I didn't know if somebody had just dropped her off, or because she just had on a sweatshirt and leggings and shoes that were too big for her. All I knew is when she told me who she was, I obviously know the circumstances of her disappearance and what happened to her parents, and I knew the person who had her was not a good person, and I needed to have her in a safe place. I went to the first house I thought of because I kind of know the guy there, but he wasn't home. So then I said, okay, Kristen lives down the road from me. I know she's a teacher. I know she'll help us.
My first thoughts were I basically went into shock. I mean, it was like I was literally seeing a ghost. We've seen pictures and TV ads and all this stuff, and to have her come in the house and say, this is Jamie Kloss, call 911, was unreal. You know, I didn't think she was alive, and then to see that in my kitchen was quite the shocker. She said she did not know him before this happened. We didn't ask any questions other than who was it and what are they driving, because we were on the phone with 911 at the time, so we were able to give them the name and the color of the car that he was driving anyway. We asked her if she was okay, we asked her if she wanted like something to eat, something to drink, and she said, no, I'm fine. And she looked really cold, so I just got a blanket off of the couch, and I said, you look cold. If you're not, you can take it off, but put this blanket on because you look like you're freezing. She was here for approximately a half an hour altogether. When the police, it was probably about 15 to 20 minutes before the police arrived at the house. And then they were here for maybe 5 minutes or so. Once they identified her, they had another car come in and get her out of here and get her to safety. I told Jamie when she was sitting on my couch yesterday, I just said, I am so glad to see you.
So Heather Hansen getting a great interview with the folks who were involved in notifying the police that Jamie Kloss had indeed been found. We're going to follow this case, as you can imagine, as it unfolds, as we move through the process. So stay with Law and Crime to do just that. We're going to take a break now. We're going to come back and get back into the California versus Merritt case, the family of 4 killed, found dead in the deserts. And we'll get into that testimony when we come back. And welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. I'm Michael Bryant till 5 o'clock. Aaron Keller will have the debrief at that time. We have a special report now from our own Kathy Russin, who has been out in California following the Merritt case, and she brings us up to date with one of the more gruesome, grisly sights and scenes that brought this case to light.
We are currently at the site where the remains of that family of 4 was found at the end of 2013, nearly 3.5 years after the family went missing. A motorcyclist came across the skull here, and investigators eventually found 2 shallow graves with the remains of the family. Now, this location is just north of Victorville, California, in San Bernardino County. Prosecutors say Charles Merritt killed the McStay family in their home in San Diego County and eventually drove the bodies here and buried them. It was a 3-pound sledgehammer. The cause of death is said to be blunt force trauma to the heads of this family of 4. The prosecutors in their opening statements say that Charles Merritt drove them here and that you can see a set of tire tracks. Now, it's very hard to see them now because so much time has gone by. I can actually see a little bit of them, but they were very clear, but even back 3.5 years after the family went missing. There's another set of tire tracks about 20 feet over. There are 2 actual grave sites. This is a memorial that the family put up, but just to the bottom of this is where the first grave was. The second one was about 20 to 25 feet over there. Now, the defense in their opening statements say that more evidence points to a 3rd business partner, Dan Kavanaugh. They also say that evidence here at this scene show that there were more than one person that committed this. They told jurors they will see the 2 sets of tire tracks and they will see that they're not consistent with the same vehicle. They also put the theory up that Joseph McStay was killed, brought here, and that Summer and the boys were brought here alive and then killed here. They say that the family was not killed at their home. There is no evidence of any blood or any DNA found at the home to show the family was killed there. The trial is expected to last up to 6 months, and Charles Merritt will face the possibility of the death sentence if he's convicted. I'm Kathy Russin for Law and Crime.
Thank you, Kathy. Great job out there. And she raises so many important points about where the killings took place. Was there more than one person involved? It's a whodunit. Maybe the defense has some information on this gentleman, Mr. Kavanaugh, that they think is so strong the jury will figure, hey, he did it. Or at the very least, we're unsure whether the guy sitting in the defense chair did it, Mr. Merritt. So it's a wild case, and that is just one little tidbit of information that kind of lays the groundwork for this case that's now into its 2nd week, but it's going to go on and on. Today, they're on a short day, so we're getting a chance to catch up on some testimony that you might have missed. Joining me is Andrew Cherkasky. And Andrew, when you have a case that has played out over so long, not the trial, but the crime, the investigation, the discovery of the bodies, does that present certain challenges in presenting the case?
Oh, of course. I think we've all heard of the first 48. Being the first 48 hours is the critical time to get evidence that tends to evaporate, whether it's witness testimony or whether it's forensic evidence. So you start to add not only days, but weeks, months, even years onto it. It's definitely something that's going to be very difficult for the prosecution to overcome.
And it's a good thing for the defense. Would you agree?
It certainly is a good thing for the defense, or at least it's the sort of thing that gives them a period of time to poke holes in and start to talk about the evidence that goes missing and that what could have been had things been collected earlier.
And that is exactly what the detective on the stand, when we most recently visited this trial, was talking about, the collection of the evidence. Let's listen to more testimony from Troy Degaulle.
Backing up to the search of the house, why didn't you ask that the cadaver dogs be brought into the house?
There were no signs of, we had no signs of criminal activity in the house that we recognized. Cadaver dogs are going to, once again, look for decomposition. Decomposition is when the body is decomposing over days. I had no indication that there were remains in the house, so we didn't enter the dogs into the house.
Did you tear up any carpet, do anything like that at the house?
No. Part of the search process is obviously to look for a crime scene, to find evidence of a crime, and we did not. And once you find evidence of a crime, if you find evidence of a crime, you can dig deeper. You can do more chemical testing. You can tear carpet up. You can cut walls out if you need to. But just in general, if you just go in and you look around and it looks normal, we don't cut walls and pull carpet. We just don't. That's not a traditional search, especially in a missing persons case.
That is Detective Troy Degaulle, part of the prosecution case in the Merritt matter out in California. He seems to be kind of a little defensive because he's really, even though he's putting on the case now for the prosecution, there's some holes in what they did or didn't do. Counselor Andrew, how do you take advantage of that when you get to the cross-examination of this witness?
Well, I think a very calm cross-examination with law enforcement in this case that focuses on what they could have done or what opportunities they missed in handling it the way they did is the way you handle it in cross-examination. I don't think you get too contentious at this point.
You know, one of the weird parts of this case, one of the mysteries, is the finding of the victim's car in San Ysidro, which is basically right on the border with Mexico, and then some video surveillance that suggests that they crossed over into Mexico. Let's go back into the courtroom now and get some testimony from Mr. Degaulle as to how that all played out.
As a detective, we follow our leads, we follow the evidence, and we chase down every statement and anything anyone ever claims happened. I have to put every one of those things to rest. So now we have the trooper at the border, which would indicate, without a good story behind it, that the McStays are missing, the trooper's at the border, there's nothing in the house I find that's suspicious, so why is the trooper at the border and where's the McStays? Well, there's the last known position of the vehicle. I happen to live in San Diego. I know that people frequently illegally park in those parking lots where the McStay vehicle was, and they illegally park there to walk across the border. So I sent a sergeant and another detective down to the U.S.-Mexico border to inquire with Immigration, Customs, and Border Patrol to find any camera that records on either side of the border and to collect all video for the 8th of February 2010 for future review. So I have some belief that could be the McStays going across the border. For me to continue an investigation across the border, we have 2 detectives on the Sheriff's Department still to this day that are international liaison detectives. I incorporated them too. They work, if I send them across the border, it's going to be Tijuana deep. They're not going much further than Tijuana. However, FBI has all kinds of people in Mexico that work for the FBI in the United States, and I can be in contact with them or work through our international liaison detectives to talk to the FBI in Mexico, and we chase down every lead. And we had a lot of leads in Mexico that I had to put to rest. We had family members that were absolutely convinced that they were in Mexico, Costa Rica, Belize. I chased down every one of those leads, regardless of who told me whatever they wanted.
You know, this gives you an idea of just how laborious this police work can be. Can you imagine looking at videotape from the border crossing in Tijuana/San Ysidro? I mean, we're talking tens of thousands of people, and I'm not even making any comments about caravans or political issues. We're talking a lot of folks coming back and forth across that border with cameras that are probably pointed at virtually every location. It's just a mile of stuff to go through. Andrew, when you hear on the stand this effort, what do you do with it as a defense attorney? Do you criticize the effort that turned up nothing? Do you ignore it? What do you do with it?
Well, I think that it demonstrates that the police didn't know what happened. They didn't know what happened until bodies were found. And so anytime you have a period of time that passes where nobody knows what occurred, I think that's good evidence.
Now we're going to take a look at the cross-examination of this witness. And Andrew, I want you to give me your feelings afterwards. How did he do? Was it effective? Let's go into the cross-examination now of the Detective Degaulle.
When you left on the 15th in the evening, because it was at night by the time you finished with Michael McStay, correct?
Right.
And you had already been at the residence for at least a few hours, I would say, correct? After you did your...
I think that's fair after, because of the interview with Michael. That's fair.
And there was multiple law enforcement officers there, correct? Not just you.
Yeah, a handful.
And you guys finished the interview with Michael McStay, and then you left, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you were going to author a search warrant affidavit to get a warrant to go into the house. Is that correct?
I didn't have enough probable cause at the point you're talking about to author an affidavit for a search warrant. My mind, I wanted to get there to make sure. For sure, that's my job.
Okay. So you said you interviewed family members in the intervening time. Is that correct?
Yes.
Right. And you actually got to walk through the residence on the 15th. Is that correct?
Clearing the residence. Walk through is the wrong word. Clearing the residence is what I got to do.
And as a trained detective, you're obviously you're looking for evidence. You're looking for signs of something. Correct?
I did.
And at least in that initial, whatever you want to call it, welfare check, can we call it? What should we call it?
That's fair. It's a welfare check.
Okay. In that initial welfare check, you didn't see anything that caused you to have any type of suspicion?
I thought the residence was very unusual because there was a lack of furniture, and we've seen the photographs. Very hard for me to tell if there was a struggle because it was totally disrupted by home improvement.
So this is the detective, Troy Degaulle, who is now being cross-examined by Mr. Merritt's attorney. Okay, Andrew, how is he doing?
He's doing well. There's something subtle that's happening here that is difficult to pick up on, but I think ultimately will come around. The idea is that the defense counsel is putting forth this idea that probable cause had not been satisfied yet. Probable cause is a very low standard. Even if you don't know the law, the more and more they talk about it, I think even a jury is going to start to understand that probable cause is a low standard. So early on, they don't even have enough evidence to get to a low probable cause standard. How do you now get to proof beyond a reasonable doubt?
Seems interesting to me. I know we've talked a lot about a welfare check, going to see if everything's all right at the home. At some point, I mean, it's a fluid situation. Doesn't it become more than a welfare check? I know we're talking more specifically now about the time he went back and Mom had done some cleaning. But just in general, this whole thing, the investigation is evolving. So wouldn't you kind of justify doing things you should have done when the changes took place rather than kind of sitting back and saying, well, we really didn't have this yet. We didn't have that yet. We couldn't go forward with this. I mean, how much do you need if you go to a house, nobody's there, things are kind of disheveled? Is it still a welfare check?
Yeah, when I talked on this case on Friday, I said the same thing, that I think that
I must have heard it somewhere.
The sheriff's department, I think, were being way too conservative in how they were going about looking for the family and searching the house. I don't think that probable cause or search warrant was necessary at this point. They had family members who said that they had access to the house and would have let them in. I don't know why the sheriff's department was being so conservative.
Yeah.
It's not quite right.
Little pedantic. Okay, we're going to go back into the courtroom in just a few moments here with more on the Merritt case out of California, right here on the Law and Crime Network. We'll be right back. Everybody, welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. We are deep in the California case against Charles Merritt, the case in which the prosecution says this guy bludgeoned 4 people to death, including his business partner, buried them in the desert. We're going to go back into the courtroom now for more testimony from one of the early investigating officers, Sergeant Michael Tingley from the San Diego Sheriff's Department. He was one of the first on the scene at the home where they were really just trying to find out if everybody was okay.
What do you do?
Well, then we do what's called a welfare check. I wanted to go in the house just to make sure that there wasn't any sign of, any blood or anything that just stuck out to be abnormal, since we are taking a missing persons of 4, which is not normal. We don't do that very often, should I say. And so I wanted to go in and check and make sure there wasn't anything that we were missing as far as foul play or anything like that. Make sure that if there were people in there, that we could have, helped them if they needed help.
Okay. So what did you do?
We did a walkthrough of the residence. So when we did the walkthrough of the house, I noticed that they weren't fully unpacked. It didn't appear that it was a fully furnished home. It appeared that whoever was there, in my mind, had just got up and left, which just raised suspicion. It didn't seem like that would be something normal. So to cover my bases as far as making sure that we crossed our T's and dotted our I's, I contacted our homicide sergeant, because anything that goes further than 10 days, they receive for follow-up and further investigation. So I wanted to let them know what we had to see if they wanted me to do anything else with the incident, or if they wanted to respond out and assess the situation.
That is Sergeant Michael Tingley. He is with the San Diego Sheriff's Office. We saw a lot of the defendant, too, as he was taking in this testimony, primarily about what the welfare visit turned into. Was it just a check to find out if everybody was okay, and, nobody was there, things seemed a little disheveled. I know we've heard a lot about, where's the blood evidence? If they were killed there, how come it wasn't so sloppy? Let me tell you a quick story. Case that I was involved in southern, I think it was Essex County. The defendant, a woman at a fertility clinic, cut up her husband with a Sawzall in their apartment. That was proven. Not a shred of evidence anywhere. No DNA, no blood, nothing to suggest the decapitation and dismemberment took place in that apartment. And yet it did. And she threw the pieces in some luggage and tossed it in the Delaware Water Gap. She was convicted despite the fact there wasn't any forensic evidence in the apartment. We'll see what happens in this case, if that is true. Andrew, tell me how important it is to find that kind of evidence, and as a defense attorney, what do you do if they don't?
Well, I think that the jury's going to want to know what the house looked like. They want to know, how did this family get taken from the home? Was it some sort of kidnapping, or was it something that they voluntarily did? And so when you have testimony of this kind of slow burn of learning more and more information and not seeing anything that tells us immediately that it was a murder, that it was gruesome, or even that there was signs of a real struggle, I think that's going to be beneficial for the defense.
Let's find out. Let's go to the cross-examination now of Sergeant Michael Tingley.
You mentioned you were placed with had eaten food.
I did state that, yes.
It was a missing family of 4.
Yes, sir.
And that's not something that's normal. You may get one missing person, right?
Yes, sir.
Like my 15-year-old daughter hasn't been home in 2 days or something, right?
Yes.
But a whole missing family of 4 is not normal, she said.
It's not common.
Better word. And then also the information you received from Mr. McStay, that his urgency that something was not right.
Is that a question, sir?
No, that's other information that came into your consideration?
Yes, sir.
You also said you will look for things, signs of violence, correct?
Yes.
Signs of a struggle.
Yes.
Things you mentioned would be broken window?
Possibility, yes.
Broken furniture?
Possibility.
Blood?
Yes.
And you would look for blood on the floor?
You would look anywhere you would think that a struggle might have occurred. If there was any sign of a struggle, those are the areas you would look.
Floor, walls, door jams?
Yes, sir.
Things that people generally will come in contact or impact with?
Yes.
And you would look for forced entry?
Yes.
And you didn't see any of them?
No, sir.
So what did you find there? Why weren't you concerned about some of the things you did find? Are you sure you looked enough? That's Michael Tingley on cross-examination in the case against Mr. Merritt. Still with me, Andrew, let me ask you this. Was there enough there in this cross-exam? Was there anything he should have done that maybe you would have done differently?
Well, in this short clip, we're seeing that the defense counsel is trying to get the information about what a law enforcement agent typically does and what they are looking for. The fact that those things are missing is evidence that the narrative of this story isn't consistent with what the prosecution says, that they were somehow lured from their home or that this was some sort of kidnapping or abduction. With a family of four, I don't think it looks like this. So he's making his points.
You know, that's important, this point about the four victims. You know, we haven't talked about motive. It hasn't really been discussed or laid out yet in the case, and we know it doesn't have to be proven, but juries want to hear what the motive is. Why did you do this? Allegedly, it was over, you know, some business dealings that led to about 40 grand or so going to the defendant, according to the prosecution. But my question is, even if that's true, let's say it's true, whether it was by Dan Kavanaugh, the defense other guy, or it was this defendant, is that enough motivation to whack four people as gruesomely as this and do such an elaborate cover-up?
I don't think so. I think that's a defense point here. The prosecution tried to make hay of it in their opening statement, and I'm sure they'll try throughout the case to say that it was motivated by money. But when you're talking about an amount of that sort, that is not enough, it seems, for murder, especially from an individual that doesn't have a particularly violent background. This isn't the sort of person who's any history with this type of low amount for violence, a low amount of money for violence type of exchange.
Yeah,
I don't see that.
It keeps coming back to me thinking, okay, this is horrible. There had to be something going on. 42 grand? I mean, come on. We're going to learn a whole lot more about this case as it unfolds. It is going to take weeks. It is a big case. It is an important case. It is a dramatic case. It's California versus Charles Merritt, also known as Chase Merritt. And as the case unfolds, we, of course, will have it for you here in its entirety at the Law and Crime Network. They're done for the day. They'll be back in court tomorrow at 12 o'clock Eastern Time. And we'll be back. We'll have much more for you when Law and Crime continues right after this.